Come on. Hello. Welcome to Gardener's World. Now, most plants start to die back around about October, and by November they've done almost everything they're going to do, and by Christmas time the garden has gone to bed. But a few plants actually at their best in autumn, and almost all grasses fall into that category. And even in February, on a bright, frosty day, they can look absolutely magnificent. So you don't cut them back at all, you leave them to give you everything they've got to give right up till spring, but we've reached that point now. Now's the time to cut all grasses back and give the new growth a chance to come through, and that's what I'm going to be doing today. This week we're paying the first of several visits to that jewel of British gardens, Sissinghurst in Kent.
This isn't just any garden. It's Sissinghurst. It's one of the major gardens that people have copied and tried to emulate across the world.
In the second instalment of Joe's series Exploring the Garden Tree, he looks at the best method of ensuring that they are perfectly planted.
Oh, look at that.
Perfect.
Spot on. And then start back filling it.
Yeah, fill them in.
It's important not to have any air gaps between the roots and the soil.
And Rachel revels in the delights of winter scent at RHS Rosemore in Devon.
Oh, that fragrance is almost overpowering.
Some of the grasses form really dramatic, sort of bamboo-like growth. This is a Miscanthus sachariflorus. They all have different qualities. You've got the Calamagrostis, terribly upright. Discampsio, which is splays and is lighter and airier. There are two types of grasses, evergreen and deciduous. The evergreen has some green in it left over from last year. For example, this pheasant grass, is a mixture of brown and green, which means that it is evergreen and shouldn't be cut back. I'll show you how to deal with those in a moment. But if you've got a Miscanthus or a Calamagrostis, say, all the previous year's growth will be brown, and that can be removed. Cut right at the base of the plant. But if there is fresh green growth there, cut above that. Because of course grasses don't grow from the top. And if you cut them, they're going to have a cut line as they grow up. Looking at fabric, it has that lovely quality. And the second aspect is sound. Grasses sound fantastic. They pick up the wind and you get this beautiful musical sound from them. And that's the first pass of the deciduous grasses. But the evergreen ones have a very different technique for clearing them out. And they do need a tidy up. You don't just leave them. So all you're looking to do is put your hands in and just tease out the dead growth. See, there you are. You come out with a handful of dead growth, but you haven't removed any of the green live stuff. And go through them all. Just tidying them up, really. If you've got pheasant grass, like I have here, hands are good. If you're doing pampas grass, for example, which is an evergreen, use gloves, because you can cut your hands to ribbons on grass. Now, inevitably, you have a huge amount of material to clear up. You may wonder what on earth to do with it, but it will all compost. If you've got a shredder, that's brilliant. Push it through that. Otherwise, just get a pair of shears, clip it up, try and reduce the size of it, increase the surface area. Don't be tempted just to chuck it away or even burn it. Use it. The best way to get inspiration for your own garden is to go and visit other gardens. And certainly one of the most famous, most visited gardens in the UK is Sissinghurst in Kent. Sissinghurst was the creation of the novelist and poet Vita Sackville-West and her husband, Harold Nicholson. And their original vision combined a strong structure with a carefree abundance of colour and planting. But over the years, particularly as the number of visitors has grown hugely, the garden gradually moved away from these guiding principles. However, the head gardener, Troy Scott Smith, is now setting out to reconnect the garden with the spirit of Vita and Harold.
I first came to Sissinghurst 25 years ago as a young sort of novice gardener, and I do remember today still that very much sort of a haunting atmosphere, so much so that I knew I wanted to return. I feel immensely privileged to be in a position of head gardener here at such a fascinating, interesting, delicate period of time. So, Sissinghurst is a wonderful place, but it's different to Vita's Sissinghurst. It's just subtly lost its way. It's too precise all year. We're trying to make the garden suitable for up to 200,000 people, whilst also perpetuating the world. We have to present Vita's garden as in its truest sense as possible. Gardens do evolve, but it needs to be for good reason. It's a very tenuous position to be in now, this fine carelessness is very hard to achieve, and it's almost always on the edge of tipping over into kind of chaos. Vita loved roses, and over the years she amassed a collection of around 300 different types of roses here at Sissinghurst, and she planted them in all kinds of ways. These wonderful dome structures, up pyramids and tripods, fruit trees and over walls, to really give a really immersive emotional experience. In 2013, when I arrived back at Sissinghurst, there was only about 100 roses of Vita's collection, and so slowly we're building up Vita's collection again. So this is actually quite a unique part of Sissinghurst, because it's the part that Harold, Vita's husband, planted and designed himself, and he called it My Life's Work. Vita called it Platform 5 Charing Cross, so something very different. But actually it's a planting based around the spring flowers that they saw together on their travels to the Alps and to the Dolomites. What we have from Harold, 16 years worth of quite detailed plans and notes about the planting that he carried out in these beds here in the spring garden. So this is 1956, and we have a tulip here called Artist. Now, we no longer grow that at Sissinghurst, so here, when we're replanting parts of this border, we're trying to source those same plants that Harold had growing here and planting them once again in the borders here. Sissinghurst is really a collaboration of Vita and Harold. It's very much a joint enterprise. Really, the garden was much more than just a place where they created a garden. It was really a love story for them both. When Vita and Harold bought Sissinghurst, the first thing they ever planted, even before they signed the deeds, was this rose here, Madame Alfred Carrier. It's a lovely, creamy white rose, and it's still here today, the same rose 80 years later. So, even though we're making quite a few changes at Sissinghurst, I suspect this one will be staying. These were the most underwhelming spaces. It should be this really highlight, this zenith to your day out at Sissinghurst. This arbour was designed and put in by Nigel Nicholson. Does it stay? Should it go because it's not authentic to Vita? That and many other questions we have to ponder constantly. We won't please everybody. I'm gardening fairly instinctively, what I feel the garden needs, and yeah, I'll be judged in several years' time.
We'll be following Troy's progress as he works to make the garden a little bit truer to Vita's vision. And if you want to visit it, it's open tomorrow for the first time this year. And if you haven't already visited it, it's a must. It's an absolute gem, and I know that it's influenced me hugely. You can see touches of Sissinghurst all over Longmeadow. Come on, what have you got? What have you got? I've got a rose here that has got a bad case of the diagonals. And the reason that it's growing at this slant is because right here where I'm standing, there used to be a large Sambucus, an elder. And we trained this poor rose and prune it so we get a decent shape back to it. It's a rose called William Shakespeare, and it is what's called an English rose. And I would say that if you're pruning any rose, relax. You're not going to kill it. Roses are tough. So I can afford to be ruthless. And if I get in there, I think I'll start by cutting just there and take that out. It's a bit thorny. By pruning it hard, I'm stimulating new growth that I will then keep. So really this is not for the sake of the plant, but just to get a decent shape. If you can see a bud or a shoot coming off sideways, cut above it. But that's all you have to worry about. Now, I've got two branches crossing here. They'll rub in the wind, they'll cause a wound, and that's where you can get problems. So one of these two has to go, and we'll take that there. That can come there, that can go there. Well, from these stubs, hopefully a new framework will grow. It may take a year or two to get the effect I want, which is a large plant growing out evenly to fill the space. And the beauty of this rose, they start in June and the flowers will be produced right through till October. Of course, I'm going to have to wait till summer before they appear, and wait for summer for their fragrance too, because they do have a good scent. However, you can find fragrance in the garden at this time of year, albeit you do need to know what plants to look for. And Rachel has been to RHS Rosemore to find the very best of winter fragrance.
The winter garden is a beautiful place, full of detail with textures, colours and sounds all vying for our attention. But there's something else here playing with our senses. You can't see it, hear it or touch it, but it's all around us, and that's scent. Here at Rosemore, they have some really distinctive winter flowering fragrant shrubs, many of which are perfect for small gardens. Sometimes that fragrance is so strong it pulls you in across the garden, and that's certainly the case with this sweet box. It's one of my absolute favourite shrubs. I think it's very much underrated. Not only does it look good, flowers, they absolutely pump out this really strong perfume. For me, it's something like almost a cross between gardenia and honey. It really is that intense. The plant really invests heavily in producing lots of flowers to attract those pollinating insects. It's all about reproduction, and you can see it's working. There's a lovely sleepy bee just here, just enjoying all of that fragrance and warming its back in the sunshine. And it works, because here's the result. These lovely black shiny berries appearing already. One of my favourite groups of winter flowering shrubs are the daphnes. This one is Jacqueline Postel, and it's quite popular, and justly so. It's well worth getting out an eyeglass, because then you can really scrutinise the flowers close up and begin to understand how they produce that fragrance. And they have a layer of epidermal cells either over the petals, the sepals, sometimes the reproductive parts of the flower, and they produce a volatile essential oil. And as that warms up in the winter sunshine, it evaporates, and that vapour just then passes through the plant and out across the garden. It's really quite magical. Where you get a slightly thicker layer of those cells, then you get an almost waxy appearance of the flower as you have here in the daphnes. And I can actually see those oils just glistening on the surface. That's absolutely fascinating. One of the most eye-catching shrubs in the winter garden is the witch hazel. They have the most unusual, beguiling flowers, almost like little strands of orange or lemon zest. And they have an earthy, really deep dark note to their scent, almost like frankincense and myrrh. The scent comes from the volatile essential oils within the petals and also the rich, sticky nectar. And on a day like today, it's sufficiently warm for that to reach me just standing here. But on a cooler day, if you cup your hands around it and just breathe on it, and then breathe in that fragrance, it's almost overpowering. In their native habitat, these are actually pollinated by fruit flies, and you can see why they're so attracted to that smell. You've got the horizontal form, you've got the colour of the flowers, and that fragrance. It's a plant with absolutely everything. Seeing those witch hazels has really brought home to me that they're not just here for the benefit of the pollinators, because we can really enjoy them too.
I think it is essential to garden for all the senses, and although everybody loves a delicious fragrance, probably most of us don't plant specifically for scent quite enough. So this year I'm going to make a real effort, and I shall be planting on the mound exclusively plants that give me the best fragrance for as long as possible throughout the year. So starting in spring, going right through into winter. And I'm going to make a start now by planting some lilies in pots. If you've got alkaline soil, it's probably a good idea to grow scented lilies in pots because they don't really like alkaline soil. And I find here that growing them in pots and also with a slightly special compost is not essential because they will grow, but if you can get either an ericaceous compost, bracken-based, or people have said that lilies do very well in a wool-based compost. What I've got here is a mixture made up from leaf mould, which we make here, which I found lilies love, a bit of preparatory compost, a little bit of wool compost, a little bit of garden compost, all mixed in together, and that does the job. You need a nice big pot. You can buy specific lily pots, which are splayed outwards. Give them good drainage, so a crock. So half fill it with this compost, and then we'll plant the lilies. Now this is Lilium regale, one of the most popular lilies of all, because not only has it got these beautiful white flowers flush with a bit of pink, but also the fragrance is exquisite. And you plant them, I'm going to put 3 in a pot this size, quite deep, about 4 to 6 inches deep, like that. If being a gloriously beautiful flower and having one of the best fragrances in the whole of the floral encyclopedia wasn't reason enough to grow Lilium regale, the fact that it's pretty resistant to lily beetle should clinch it. Put the pot outside, somewhere vaguely sheltered. It doesn't need feeding, shouldn't need watering, rain will do the job, until it starts to grow. Then when it reaches about a foot or so height with the foliage, I will take this to its position on the mound. It'll start to flower towards the middle of June and give me 6 weeks or so of glory. Now, this is just one plant that I shall be growing amongst the scented collection on the mound. And I'll try and cover as many different types of plant as possible in the right tree. For a small space that's going to do the job you want from it with the right colours or form, can be quite a challenge. Last week, Joe gave us a guide to the range of trees you could have, and this week, he gets expert advice on how best to plant your tree.
Today I'm going behind the scenes at a tree nursery to discover how trees are cultivated and how to give your tree the very best start in life.
By the time a tree is ready to sell, it'll already be several years old. At this nursery, just south of Bristol, Simon Scarth is responsible for making trees grow healthily from saplings to specimens. I caught up with him in the field where they nurture their younger trees.
Hi Joe.
What a beautiful day, what a beautiful location.
It is, it's a lovely day, isn't it? It's cracking out here.
It's a great spot. How old are the trees here?
Well, these trees are going to be between 3 and 5 years old.
Oh, has to happen to them here? How do you look after them?
Well, we do a lot of pruning work, caning, making sure they get a good shape. A lot of the formative work you need to do for a tree in the younger years.
So once they've grown out in the field for a few years, what happens to them next?
Well, we'll dig them up and we'll either plant them out somewhere else in the field, or we'll take them back to our other site to be potted on. This is the part of the nursery where the trees are brought once we've dug them out of the field, and we bring them in here and heel them into the wood chip to keep them moist, the roots moist and wet throughout the winter.
So it's like a series of trenches, all these huge trenches.
Yeah, and then we just heel them in wood chip, and then out they come.
And they're really a very compact root ball, isn't it? I mean, not a lot of roots on it.
Yeah, well, transplanting it helps to stop it creating big, solid roots and have more of a mass of these more fibrous roots, which helps absorb more nutrient and water.
And can you buy these trees bare-rooted here?
You can buy them bare-rooted, yes. They're a bit cheaper to buy bare-rooted, but you can only plant them between November and March. So if you want to do any of your planting after that, you'd need to have a container grown tree.
And how much would something like this be bare-rooted?
Something like this, a 10, 12 centimetre girth, would be between £70 and £80, depending on the species.
So a bit cheaper than container grown?
Yeah, it's about 20-25% cheaper than a container grown plant.
Right.
If you could just hold that for me,
Sure.
I'll do a bit of pruning.
Back at the barn, our first job is to trim off some of the thicker roots.
So would you do this to this big root tree if it was going straight in the ground?
You'd still want to prune off any damaged roots and maybe lightly prune any big roots to help encourage some root growth, but ultimately you want to leave as much of it on as possible.
But for the trees that will stay on the nursery, it's important to make sure the roots have room to grow in their new containers. That they're
A really big connecting thing to do. But if you're not planting a tree, here are some other things you can be getting on with this weekend. Buddleias produce their flowers on growth made in the current spring and summer. So if you don't prune them, the flowers just get higher and higher up the shrub. Cut them back. If you're growing them in a border, leave a framework a foot or two tall. But if it's in open ground, you can take all the growth down to the bottom couple of buds. For many of us, our soil is still very cold and rather wet, and it's too early to plant or sow much. However, you can speed up the process of drying out and warming up by covering it. Cloches are excellent. You can use polythene sheeting or garden fleece. Simply pin it to the ground, and that will help prepare the ground so you can get to work sooner. Now that doesn't look very handsome, but it will help warm up the soil. If it rains, it doesn't matter. The water will go through, the fleece gets wet, and then it will dry out. But what you're looking for is to get that soil warm. Cloches, by the way, are much better. If you can get hold of cloches, they're fantastic. And as soon as the soil warms up, then we can grow masses of veg, and more than ever this year, because I have started to make a new area of the garden and expand the vegetables we grow here out so we can grow twice as many vegetables, lots of different varieties, and cook them and eat them and enjoy them as much as possible. But not today. In fact, not anything today because we've run out of time. But I'll see you back here at Longmeadow next week.